Okay. So I'll give you guys about 5 minutes. We'll see who else wants to come tonight. I know it's spring break for a lot of people, so I'm not sure what our attendance will look like, but hi Sarah, we will be here regardless. And for those just joining us, Sarah and Adriana, I think you're the most recent. Here's our questions just to think about. And then if you can, chat some thoughts on the right. That would help me just get to know a little bit about where your thinking is this week and what's on your mind, what we should talk about. Hi. For people who just arrived, take a look at these questions, and if you can, do some writing here on the right. Mm-hmm. Katie, I agree. I thought those norms were hugely important. Daniela agrees too. Mm-hmm. If you can you think about, for those of you who agree that those norms were important, what about the norms were important? Like that there's any rules, those particular rules. See if you can think about it. He talked about it. It's okay. I watched it this afternoon. You may have not re-watched the video today, which is totally fine. But I found that teacher was saying some really interesting things about the ways those rules establish structures that support students who have fewer skills in peer relationships and social dynamics, and also extend and kind of problematize social dynamics for students with an existing strength. So if you have some more thoughts on it, see if you can we have about 1 or 2 more minutes for writing, so take a couple back. Mm-hmm. I liked the thinking too. I agree, Katie. Mm-hmm. 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 Great. Yeah, I thought that thinking reminded me a lot of what we were talking about last week and the week before about establishing a classroom climate that embraces diversity writ large. Having routines like that established where kids thank each other and validate each other and don't evaluate the quality of someone's idea, but rather validate that they shared an idea, I think can really support those kinds of classroom environments. He was a great example, I thought. Um, mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I agree. Sarah, I like what you're saying here about taking away judgment. That calls up a lot for me. I'm curious, can you expand on that? It's 6:05, so you could take the mic if you want to expand on that, or you could write if you feel more comfortable, or you could say, no, I don't want to. Hi.
Oh, I can take the mic for a second.
Great.
I just, you kind of said it as you were speaking. You said it very eloquently about how it just validates the fact that they're sharing.
Uh-huh.
That's what I really like.
Uh-huh. So that it doesn't. Oh, go ahead. Did you want to say more?
Oh, no.
Yeah, but I liked that too. I thought that so good. So I agree. So I think that validating the existence of a comment as opposed to I like that comment versus I don't like that one, I think is a huge subtle but extremely powerful move, right, that he made. Um, the other thing that I see potentially in that comment, I don't know if you intended it, Sarah, or if other people had thought of this as well, is that by kind of having those rules to refer back to, it takes away students' judgment of the quality of like how someone's interacting socially or if they should be interacting socially, because it separates the rules from like a teacher is saying this is acceptable or this is not acceptable in the moment, or a peer saying this is acceptable or not acceptable in the moment.
Right. Because I really liked how in the beginning of the lesson, when he was establishing the class for the year, it all generated from their ideas of it being their ideal classroom. So it was all based on what they wanted to see in terms of what, like you said, what he wanted to see.
Exactly. So I thought that was really powerful. I'm glad. It seems like a lot of people got a lot of value out of that video. I did too. I thought he had some like really interesting things in there. So let's see if we can. I'm gonna I like that they had to make goals and then see if they met them, giving support and why they think they did or didn't. Yeah. I liked that too, Daniela, and I think the kind of other feature of that lesson that really stood out to me when I rewatched it today was the way he used those kind of externally posted rules and the steps of having the fishbowl discussions as a scaffold, both for students in terms of their social interactions and social skills development, but also academically, obviously because they were getting into potentially some like very rigorous math talk by having those kinds of rules, and I thought that was really interesting and powerful. But what I liked about it too was it was I don't know if this jumped out to everyone else as much as it did to me. It really built the kids' independence, right? So they were less reliant once those routines are established. They can be a lot less reliant on the teacher to step in and say like that's how you partner, or that's not how you partner, or this isn't the way a discussion's supposed to go, or that kind of question doesn't work, because the kids start to interact more with each other and with the rules rather than checking back over and over and over again if they're pleasing the teacher, if they're doing it right, or if they're like not doing it right, or how that works. They're starting to get a sense of what it is that the rules expect of them as opposed to what it is the teacher expects of them, and that builds them towards independence and therefore is a scaffold for them in the classroom. I don't know if, and I think that Daniela, your comment brought that up for me also, that when, if the kids are then tasked with evaluating themselves, like, did I meet those goals? Did I get to where I was trying to go? That is yet another step towards them self-regulating, self-monitoring, having this kind of meta-awareness of how they are in terms of their participation and their learning in the classroom. And it makes for, I think, a really exciting learning environment. I don't know about you guys. Other thoughts on that? You're welcome to write them, pop in. Okay. So as you may have guessed from these questions, we're going to talk about social cognition this week, and we're going to talk about structures for supporting students' social interactions in the classroom, because I think they're, I saw reflected in the quick writes, which by the way were excellent. Once again, I just really appreciate everyone sharing authentically. I noticed in the quick writes there were several kind of questions raised about this number 2 question down here. How do student needs for social cognition skills, do they look the same, or they don't look the same, right, in like early grades, primary grades, and for older kids? So we'll talk a little bit about those distinctions. And then in number 1, I had these kind of ideas, a few in there about like, here's think, pair, share, here's fishbowl. Oops, I forgot my closing parentheses. I think it might be nice for us to get some resources going of the kinds of structures in the classroom that support social interaction, and especially offer supports for those kids who are struggling with social interaction. Before we move on, though, I want to read Adriana's post because I didn't see it yet. It says, on the needs for social cognition skills and how they change as they get older. Thank you. I feel as though the younger they are, the more likely you are to brush it off or turn it into a teachable moment. Whereas when a high schooler might make the same comment, there's less tolerance because we expect them to essentially know better. I guess the gap grows. It makes me think of a student we have who makes rude comments to and about peers, and when approached about it, he often comments, "What? It's the truth." Adriana, I hear you. So is that vignette towards the end, that's kind of about like if a 5 or a 6-year-old says something like that seems rude or maybe like kind of less socially elegant, it's expected on a lot of levels because they're just developing those early social skills. For a high school student to do it, that indicates there's something else going on, right? So that could be the result of many things. Exactly. So it could be, let's take it on its like kind of face value. It could be a social cognition issue and a confusion about how to interact with peers and what is socially appropriate commentary versus what is not socially appropriate commentary. If that is your suspicion, Adriana, or you have kind of started to poke around a little bit in the student's more global functioning socially and discovered that, you know what, it looks like actually this person's not picking up on these cues of like what's okay and what's not okay, then a thing to do might be to start addressing the idea of that student's kind of like social information processing, their social controls, their political acumen. There's all these terms, right? These components of the function that are listed within the construct. And they're not, they don't always follow really neatly what things look like in practice. But, you know, some places to look. I'm looking here at the placemat, which is awesome. And we'll talk about that in a couple minutes. But so like one thing it could be is an issue with humor regulation. So I don't know the student, but it could be that that person thinks it's funny and that it's just the truth. It could be with social conceptualization of understanding the nature of relationships. So it might be that that kind of commentary is more accepted or acceptable among very close friends, but that if you are kind of making comments that are like rude or not the sweetest to people you're not very close with, that becomes a big problem. It could be many things. I don't know him, so the student, so I don't know. Adriana, have you given him some thought a little bit for like what you think is most likely going on? It could be none of those things, but I'm gonna guess it's partially humor regulation, partially wants to get around. Okay, that's interesting. He's being honest, so it shouldn't matter. So that if a person thinks it shouldn't matter that they're being honest and they're in that age group, that starts to become a social cognition issue, I think. So like it shouldn't matter is kind of an existential question at some level, and I think adolescents tend to ask themselves like, why do we have to do things this way? But this doesn't sound like that's really what's going on with the student you're talking about. And so if it's true that a student doesn't actually get that it does matter, even if he thinks it shouldn't matter, if it's true or not true, then there's going to be some issue with social conceptualization. Now, it could be, to kind of go back to this issue we were talking about last week of like what's in a particular moment, interaction, or lesson, like kind of what's the construct of primary problem. It could be that this person has more difficulty with social conceptualization in part because they have some other issue going on that has social impacts. So for example, people who are on the autistic spectrum often have associated difficulty with social conceptualization. And therefore, sometimes a person who may be in that position would really benefit from some explicit teaching around, like, what are the acceptable ways to interact with peers versus what are the less acceptable ways to interact with peers. It could be that the person wants to get a rise out of individuals because they're not sure of ways to access intimacy with others, and that starts to become a way to at least get an interaction when otherwise they may be closed off from interactions. And so it can be useful to start thinking about, ninth grader with autism happens mostly unstructured times under his breath or with body language in class. Yeah. So it's very likely, in my experience with students with autism, it's a really natural tendency to want to interact, and without having a knowledge of what appropriate social interaction looks like and without being able to pick up on it on your own, it's very challenged. And so that explicit teaching makes a huge difference for them. Laura Beth, you have a student with autism. We've made mini books about how to interact with certain situations. So that's a great example, Laura Beth. Thank you, of explicit teaching around social conceptualization for someone who's not picking up on it, has most likely a neurological barrier of some sort to picking up on social cues in the ways that you would expect a child to from the time they're young until they're growing up. Do other people have ideas for the kinds of supports for people with autism in particular, but also for kids in general that are helpful? So these mini books about interacting, I've heard about in terms of like social stories I saw reflected in some of the quick writes for this week. Does anyone else have ideas? I have a few others if no one else chats in. So another one for students with autism, or really, so there's things that I'm going to say now that will cross over between older students that have some challenge in the area of social cognition, including students with autism, and young students who may or may not have a challenge in social cognition but don't have skills developed yet. So some of these same techniques and strategies can be useful for both of those groups of people, although of course they have different needs in other ways and at other times. Okay, but so one is like role playing, which is very straightforward, but this is something that I've done with older kids, and I also do now with my 5-year-old son who struggles sometimes at school to have appropriately acceptable responses to things that are upsetting him, right? So he will act out in a physical way when using his words would be what the teachers are asking for. This is different than the situation Adriana's talking about, but at the same time, the same strategy of role-playing could be useful. And it can go something like this. We can revisit an incident that didn't work, that broke down in some way, and then we kind of create a new narrative around it. So in the case of my son, because it's in my head since we just talked about it last night, he said kids were teasing him. He asked them to stop. They didn't stop. He punched someone. Okay. So we talked about these like kind of 3 steps of like, first you ask them to stop, then you walk away. That's what they've been taught at school anyway. Then you tell a teacher, and that's where the interaction would end, as opposed to you never go ahead and punch someone, but that doesn't make it okay for someone to tease you either. So we did a lot of explicit teaching around what's appropriate social behavior at school and what's not, right? So in that role play scenario, and then we practiced it, right? So then I played the teasing kid, my husband played the teacher, my son came up to me, I teased him, he said stop, I didn't stop, he walked away, I followed him, he went to tell the teacher. He wanted to practice that several times last night, and we've done this in the past with him, and it's been quite useful. So that's just an example of an idea. That's a different scenario depending on your 9th grader, Adriana. He may or may not want to do a role play. Often adolescents are not interested in role play. However, if you have a very kind of close relationship with that student, or there's a lot of trust built there, it can actually be something that's useful. I also find in middle grades, like grades 4 through 6, and probably older, but my experience with doing role plays has been in those kind of middle grade ages, that having a whole class practice scenarios and even generate what are appropriate social responses to challenging social situations, and then practice those as a whole class can be really fun, community building, and helpful. For students who are challenged in social cognition, for students who aren't necessarily challenged in this kind of way like the student Adriana's talking about, but perhaps have less developed skills in an area of social cognition, it can be beneficial for them. And it can also help the students who have a real strength kind of take a step back and think more broadly about like what's operating or what's at play in social interactions, so that that can further strengthen their strengths or help them empathize with and offer support to peers. Does that make some sense? I'm hoping. Are there questions about anything I just said or those kinds of ideas? Okay. Well, if that's the case, I thought it might be kind of interesting. So, like, I wanted to list out, I had some notes up here. So these are let me just cut and paste them. I'll make them bigger. I wrote down the steps that the teacher in the video went through, because as I was rewatching it, I was like, wow, those are really interesting kinds of steps to have kids go through. So I thought it might be kind of fun to just talk about them in order and think about what they offer in terms of social supports. So I heard someone mention earlier, they liked that the students came up with the ideas, like came up with the working agreements themselves. So I think it might make some sense. Like so that's one thing about working agreements potentially that is really beneficial. So student generated. So my question is, how does that routine of establishing working agreements, what do you think that offers students in the class, or what does that kind of afford in the classroom? Hopefully that question makes sense. If it doesn't make sense, just chat in like, what? And if it does make sense, boundaries, thank you. Yvonne, yeah, okay, so then everybody kind of knows what those boundaries are, what's expected of them, and that can offer a sense of familiarity and safety to kids. I agree. What else? I'll offer one. It offers clarity. So for students who are not sure how they should be participating or behaving, for those students who most likely have a weakness in social skills or social cognition, establishing those working agreements gives them understanding, potentially, of what's going on and what they should be doing. Any other ideas about that? Okay, I'm going to add one more because I can't help it. Community, right? So as students are creating those working agreements, that's their class-generated item document that lives in the classroom with them. And so it really supports establishing the sense of community within the classroom, which is not a direct result of it, or not necessarily the direct intention, but it can be very powerful. Okay. What about this number 2? Working ethics. So then it establishes a sense of like what you should be doing for working, like what work looks like. I appreciate that, Eva. How about this idea of him explaining the business of the class and telling students what you expect? What does that do? Anyone have thoughts on that? What did that do? Okay, so it puts everyone on equal, can I say equal footing? I'm going to rephrase. If you don't like that, please say no. Thank you. Yeah, it kind of lets everyone in on the secret. So it's not like some kids are like the kids that figured it all out and everyone else is basically in the dark and trying to. Yeah, I think that's really clear. I think it establishes a sense that everyone's equal and equal footing for people. And I also think it it has that scaffolding. I'm not going to write this, but it has that kind of scaffolding function where it starts to kind of take the teacher out of the picture a little bit. So like the task demands this. Here's what I'm expecting. Here's what the task demands. Now you guys can go and work on this, so that it's less about these constant interactions between student and teacher, student and teacher. Great. What did you think about that idea of having students work individually or in pairs to solve the problem? Which it looked like he had them all in pairs. So that step, I mean, that's just work time. Can I just say work time? And then pairs, opportunities or social talk and interaction. All right. So this idea of respecting all ideas that came up, that one I feel like we've talked about. I'm going to write validation. Sarah, automaticity. Help out. Are you guys talking about step 3? I hadn't thought of either of those ideas. I love that. Interesting. Okay, so that's like content automaticity and like practice with the content. Great. Awesome. Thank you. And Sarah, do you mean like practice, like it, because it offers practice, it helps balanceability level? Good. I'll assume that is what you mean, unless you come back at me and say no. Okay. So the idea of respecting all ideas is validating input, which I feel like we did talk about, but if you have something else you want to say about that. And peer assistance. Thank you. Fishbowl. What did you guys think about that in the fishbowl? I was very curious. So one thing I thought was really cool about there are two things I thought were really cool about the fishbowl. One was deep engagement with the content. Yeah, they seemed to be really observing, like they were really watching each other. Exactly, they were like in the math, right? Which I thought was really great. And you know, it doesn't always look like that in classrooms when you're in there, that kids are like excited to be talking about solutions and how they all arrived at their answers. Reduces stage fear, so like comfort sharing in front of others. Nice. I agree. Cindy, you love that. I might have, I just met with a group of teachers last week that I'm doing some coaching work with, and one of them shared her strategies for how she sets up fishbowls, and we actually talked about fishbowls. So if you want, Cindy, after we finish this activity, I'll see if I can find that. Yeah, they had to be able to, okay, so that's about the content to me too, Daniela, right? They had to deep engagement with the math content and talk, right? Yeah, and in fact, he was talking about that, is that even those kids sometimes that are like at the top, as far as how they score on assessments, if you ask them to slow down and stop and explain how they got what they got through reasoning, it really offers a nice built-in extension for them, because that is often quite difficult for kids who have a real strength and an automaticity and are facile with math, and in particular arithmetic in early grades. If you ask them to stop and unpack their thinking, which they need to do in the new Common Core based assessments, that kind of throws their game in a productive way. It offers them a chance to kind of struggle through mathematical reasoning in ways they are typically not called upon to do. So it's really helpful for them. And then it's also helpful for the kids that are just learning to articulate their thinking in the first place and are practicing. Yes, Cindy, I will get that for you. Sarah, I love that. It reinforces multiple ways to solve a problem. Had not thought about that. Oops. I love that. Yeah. So it sends the message, right? Not only mathematically how important that is to think about in terms of how we approach problem solving in math, but it also opens up the ideas that there's multiple ways to approach problems kind of generally, which might be a topic to take up in other at other times, in other content areas, or for other purposes in the classroom. Great thinking, you guys. And a share and exchange of perspectives. Eva, I'm going to add that here because it's related, although of course a different idea. Just because we have so many students that need to be modeled, you like the structure around it. So it provides a structure for sharing. Agreed. Yeah, the fishbowl is a really interesting technique. And yeah, we'll talk about it in a couple minutes, actually. And I just thought they ran it incredibly well. And it really gives kids, I don't know if you picked up on this, the kids start to really kind of own learning in the classroom in really powerful and fun ways. Great. It teaches them to wait, which is really important for social cognition. So, to wait and take turns in discussion. I don't know if they went into it. I don't think they went into it that much in that video, but quite often in fishbowls and in Socratic seminars that I've been seeing in classrooms lately as well, the students, the teacher will intervene less and less often over the course of the school year as students get more comfortable with the rules and the structures of those kinds of discussions. And then it really starts to work towards that wonderful goal of having the teacher be invisible in the classroom, and to the extent that the students are really taking up and taking on what it is they need to do in the activities and for learning. So I found that, for me, my kind of eye is trained to that lately just because of what I've been working on, but I thought it was just a really powerful example of how to do that as well. Okay. Modeling the challenges of learning. Do you guys remember that part? So then he had this conversation. It only was about 30 seconds in the clip, but he was down with the kids and he was talking about like how he gets nervous sometimes when people ask him to spit out what he knows really quickly, and he was kind of pre-validating for the kids difficulties that they might have encountered. Are there thoughts on what that affords or contributes in the classroom? So one thing I think it did was just validate, right? And I'm going to use this word normalize. And by that I mean sometimes students think that like they're the only ones who are experiencing upset or challenge. But so they recognize, I'm reading Laura Beth's answer as well. So like it recognizes that everyone's different. And then it also might help them recognize that everyone faces challenge, right? So I think it also serves to build community because it allows for safety, which I can't remember who was saying that. It builds a safe space. Nice. Great. Okay. So these two I thought were useful too. Debriefing the fishbowl. Anything you noticed in that? What that offered the class? I'm going to write this. Build student independence. So as they start to unpack how they were, what happened in the fishbowl, how that was for them, how the process went, they can start to build up their independence. Okay. And then finally, self-reflection, exactly. And then finally with that self-reflection, that's just another opportunity to do that, right? Is that reflecting on learning as a routine, which is really important. So why did I just do this with you? Well, I thought it would be kind of useful to unpack that lesson because there was so much in it. And I didn't want to do it last week because not everyone had watched it by the time we had our session. But I think there's some really I suggest, if you're interested, go back and watch it again. It's only 9 minutes. And think about it through the lens of like what his teaching moves are offering students in terms of support for social cognition. And because there was a ton in there were demands placed on social cognition all over that lesson, right? Tons of demands. However, those demands were met with supports, structures, and scaffolds such that all students were offered the opportunity to participate meaningfully in the activity as opposed to kind of being shut out if they didn't come with a pre-existing social strength. And that is crucial for all kids, but especially kids who have either some kind of issue that is compromising their social skills development and ability, such as autism or being on the autistic spectrum can often have those impacts as well, or if they have some kind of freestanding issue with social cognition in particular, which is quite rare in my experience. Most typically, social cognition issues and weaknesses, identifiable weaknesses that are not developmental and are not from, not related to kind of other emotional issues that students have had. Quite often, social cognition weaknesses are related to another weakness in another area. For example, students who have severe language processing and production issues often have accompanying social weakness. They have less social opportunities to interact through language, and quite often processing the world is confusing and stressful, and so their social cognition is compromised as a result of that, and it ends up having a real impact that they're not moving forward developmentally in the way that their typically developing peers are. So hopefully that's helpful just to kind of think about those connections between classroom structures and supporting social cognition in general. So, wow, it's already 6:40, my goodness. Okay, so there's a couple more things I wanted us to talk about this week before I just check in with you about your assignments and all that stuff. Because I can't believe it, next week is our last session, which is blowing my mind. I apologize for scrolling through this while I'm talking. It may be annoying. But I did want to talk about this idea of, how do student needs for social cognition skills change when they're older? So like the same behavior in a young child that is thought of as cute even, or expected or typical, really stands out as kids get older. So I guess what I wanted to think about is how we as professionals can determine with students, like what are behaviors that are expected and sometimes frustrating for teachers, but expected, versus what are behaviors that are important to go in and offer supports to individually and specifically address with students. So that question of like, let me move this away so we don't get confused. That question of like, how can you determine if there's someone's kind of just developing and hasn't gotten there yet, or if it's not developing? Any thoughts on that or insights from your own experiences, either with your target student or with students that you've worked with in the past?
I have something about the social condition difficulties as
Yeah.
the kids get older.
Okay, great. I'll pull it back.
If that's okay. Anyway, really quickly. So
Yeah.
we are a K-8 school.
Okay.
And it's very much like most elementary schools. You know, you get the families that have multiple students. So, you know, one teacher gets like all of the kids of the Smith family or whatever. So
Yeah.
you see them as they progress. You see them as they grow. So what's interesting to me is I work with someone who has taught some of our current fourth graders when they were in K1, and she sees how some of the difficulties that they had in K1 are amplified in fourth, and sometimes he's even made comments of, what happened? They were not like this in K1. You know, what happened between second, third, and fourth? So I think for some things, and I know I had a student last year who And I run into this more with the girls than the boys,
Mm.
where the girls are always like, they're so cute at first grade, the parents love them, they can do no wrong, and they come to me, and I'm like, hey, you know, your daughter needs to sit down, and I don't think she's the cutest thing ever, and those little cheeky things that, you know, 10 and 1 teachers or the parents think are so cute, by the time they get to fourth grade, I'm like, you know what, it's not very cute in fourth grade. You need to tone it down a bit, because you're in fourth grade, we're here to study. But I think, so basically what I'm trying to say is, you have to just kind of gently curb some of those social skills and say, you know, that's okay, we can have fun, or you know, if you're losing your patience, help them to see that there's boundaries, because as they get older, it's gonna be more obvious. I think it's gonna be a little more difficult for everyone. I mean, it's and you know, I think the parents see it, but they expect us to accommodate as teachers and just kind of like deal with it. But yeah, I mean, I think the personality is there, and as they get older, it'll get better or it'll get worse. It just gets amplified in a positive or a negative way.
Oh, that's an interesting idea. Yeah, thank you. What do you got? Does anyone have thoughts on that? Like, things get amplified as kids get older. So the behaviors, if they're not, I'm curious about that. Things get, code switching between, I'm reading Adriana's response as well. So I think I heard, who was that talking, actually? I didn't even ask. I'm so sorry. Who was it? Chat me. Yvonne, thank you. I'm like, I don't want to say that person. Yeah, so I mean, I think what Yvonne was talking about and what I'm seeing in Adriana's response and what I actually saw also in some of the quick writes is a little bit different than social cognition from where I sit. It's actually more about social skills development and what's deemed appropriate versus inappropriate. So Adriana touches on it in terms of this idea of code switching. And Yvonne, I heard you talking about it like the same behavior that was okay in first grade is not at all okay in fourth grade. And one might think that behavior would have been modified or worked on between those years, but then it turns out it wasn't. And I saw it in some of the quick writes where people were talking about, well, like, how come some of the families aren't picking up on some of this work in terms of helping students develop the skills that are appropriate for schooling. And I think that those are valid issues as a teacher, and defining like what is school appropriate behavior versus what might be acceptable at home but is like never going to fly in the classroom, and the kind of unevenness within classrooms of students, some of whom come from families who have put in a lot of work to make sure the students are behaving in ways that are socially acceptable at school versus families who have a different understanding of what that should look like. Yeah, I'm saying it in different language, but Adriana, yeah, or home just accepts that's just who they are, or that they'll grow out of it, exactly. And I think that so in terms of like our course, those issues are slightly tangential to the idea of social cognition strengths and weaknesses. However, in terms of actual classroom practice, the same supports that can be offered for students who are just coming from homes who are like, well, that's just who they are, may actually be very helpful for students who have a weakness in social cognition. So I'm going to talk about them kind of as a group now, but they're not really a group that operates and functions in the same way. Some kids who have a real struggle with social cognition or picking up on social cueing will need a different level of support over a longer stretch of time than kids who maybe like just happen not to learn things at home and need a clear definition of what's going on and should be going on in the classroom. That's partly why I was so excited about these steps, because what those steps in that lesson offered was a model of a structure through which teachers can make very clear to students, like, hey, this is how we behave in discussions. We start with our working agreements, okay? Working agreements means kids in the class are going to articulate what is it that you should be doing when you're working in a group. That way you can call up, okay, like what have kids learned from home that's acceptable versus what have they not learned from home. You can let the kids kind of share among each other, become each other's resources for what is school-like behavior, and then you can take it outside of the teacher getting annoyed or evaluating kids and put it into this is what our agreements are. So some of these structures, including the fishbowl, including saying thank you for validating ideas, some of those structures are very subtle turns of, they're like turns of the source of the social information. So the social information about what's acceptable and what's not may not have been available at home, but this way it kind of gets it out in the open in the classroom, and then the kids are able to work towards it to the extent they're interested in doing that, and to the extent they want to and are encouraged to participate meaningfully in the classroom. So I think that stuff really makes a huge difference. There was another question from the Quick Write where I can't remember who it was that asked that, but it was asked about like ELL students, like wondering if they're struggling in partnerships because of a language or because of a social issue. And so just like a quick aside, because it popped in my head, a very straightforward way to kind of get inside of that would be to see if you can locate that student communicating with a peer in their home language and see if that student seems to have similar difficulties interacting. If not, it's probably a language issue. If so, it's more likely to continue pursuing whether or not it's a more socially related issue. So I think, wow, the time is flying today. So I want to read through what you guys are saying, and then I just want to, then we're going to talk real quick about offering structure in grouping, just generally, and then I will ask you about your assignments. Yeah, Yvonne, gently explain the standards. Laura, what did you say? Oh. Oh, have a hard time with your view of first grade behavior. They say that's just the way they are. Also, they have to experience that they have to behave differently in different settings. Eva, yeah. Sometimes parents just don't know what to do. I think that is a really generous and valid point, Yvonne, to make. Quite often they don't know, and quite often I think they do think they'll just grow out of it. And some kids do, and some kids don't. And you know, everything in life is like a spectrum, and so this included. And so those structures in the classroom to get really clear about the expectations, just like with everything, make a huge impact, but it's often overlooked for being as crucial as it really is. I've tried to have a parent tell me she's a girl, we aren't going to be that hard on her because of that. Yeah. Advice for Laura Beth. I have some, but yeah. So, Laura Beth and everyone, this discussion you guys are having here is calling up for me. I'm going to share a quick vignette. So, my first job in the field of education, I was young. I was 22 or 21, and I was hired as a behavioral support specialist for students in a school partial program. So, it was kids who were in a half-day therapeutic environment and then had half day of school taught by a district teacher, but the teacher was on site because they were in a separate setting. And so these were kids that were violent, and these were kids that were severely emotionally disturbed in terms of their diagnoses. Okay. And they were also growing up in a high poverty area in North Philadelphia, which is where I'm from. And so they were in like a really, you know, if you visualize like a very struggling urban neighborhood filled with drugs and crime, this is like their neighborhood, and then this is their program that they were in. And so I had a lot of issues with the parenting going on for these kids not aligning, right, with the expectations of how kids would behave in school, to put it mildly. So it would, what the kids thought was socially acceptable behavior, their models of socially acceptable behavior did not at all line up with what I was thinking socially acceptable behavior was. And on top of that, they had these kind of crisis-like issues going on such that they were in this special program. So long story short, we had a hard year in a lot of ways in that program. However, one of the things that I, as a teacher, gained from that I have taken with me is that the teachers definitely have the opportunity to set up guidelines, much like these ones are an example of, but to just kind of acknowledge that the way school runs actually is and potentially might be very different from how home runs, and that's okay because that's how school is running. In this classroom. In this classroom, we say thank you when someone shares their idea. In this classroom, we encourage people to take risks. In this classroom, we celebrate curiosity. And that might not be the case at home. In this classroom, girls are expected to behave as to their best potential as learners. In this classroom, so taking the classroom as a separate space and calling it that explicitly and giving it a set of rules to operate in that space as its own community, I think can be helpful when interacting with families whose perspectives don't align with how you think they should. That said, of course, it's always like really important to honor people's cultural backgrounds and what they are coming from. You want to be knowledgeable about that and respectful of that. But that doesn't mean that the way people are choosing to parent needs to dictate the way that students can behave in the classroom as well. I don't know. Now I'm going to read what you guys were saying. Just went off. Adriana, yeah. So very often kids are very much like their parents, right? And that's going to be the case. And as teachers, we take them all, right? So that includes families that have parents who have an approach that I personally probably don't agree with often. And my own kids, now I have a daughter in first grade. I'm seeing it from the other side, and wow, it's really scarier than I thought it would be. And it's tricky and sensitive stuff. And I think that's why I gravitate so much towards these structures, because those structures really offer a way to take it outside of personal emotion and put it into the purpose of learning at school. These skills support interacting with peers at school and interacting with the teachers at school and behaving in an appropriate way, and therefore that's important for our community. And I think that won't fully resolve issues of like differences between parents and teachers' expectations, but it might take some of the emotional charge out of it, and it can also offer the kids some choice in the matter for themselves. So that way, at least they're knowledgeable about ways they could be interacting with peers that would be more aligned with school expectations, and then as they grow over time, they'll have that knowledge base to draw upon when they are making choices about how they're going to behave. Assuming, of course, that they don't have a prevailing predominant social cognition weakness. If they do, then there's going to be, it's not a natural assumption that they're just going to kind of pick up on the social learning over time. Okay, so we have just a few minutes left. I am curious, I just want to make sure, I didn't yet give you guys feedback on your part 2 for the learning assignment, but you don't have part 3 due until the end of next week, so I'm hoping that's okay. If you need it sooner to move on to part 3, please let me know. Just email me and I'll make sure I do yours kind of right away. Full disclosure, I'm in the throes of finishing my dissertation, and so my scheduling has gotten a bit hectic in the last week, and so I wanted to have read through them by today. I did not read through them all by today, but I don't want to leave anyone hanging if you feel like you really need feedback. So please, please, please let me know. That said, are there questions about part 3 because it's coming up, or questions about any of the assignments before next week? Your work has looked really good from where I sit. I looked through the social cognition viewing template. I didn't grade it yet, but I looked at your work on there, and that looked great. Otherwise, I think you guys are doing great. Okay, so just let me know if you do have questions. I will give you a heads up on this for week 6. No, I'll see you next week, so don't worry about it too much. Yes? Is that someone? I think you'll like the social skills autopsies with Rick Lavoie. This is another structure for taking a look at incidents of breakdown with students and helping students identify like where the breakdown occurred and what they could do differently. So this will have a lot of overlap with the idea of social stories or social books that I heard several people raise in your work and in this conversation here. social skills autopsies accomplishes, I think it has many of the same goals, but it takes a different approach. And it's kind of cool. So hopefully you guys will get some value out of that. I also think social skills autopsies, as they're laid out, are really interesting, and the template that's on the Moodle page that you'll use for your assignment, please modify as much as modify and do whatever you want to do to it to make it useful for your own work. So sometimes tools like that, I find they're not a totally perfect fit for experience and practice. So to the extent that's the case for you, I encourage you to make it your own, and use it in ways that are actually helpful to you. The last thing I just kind of want to tell you is that I think it's been fairly clear through the comments that I've made during this session and your assignments, but offering structure to students when they're asked to work in pairs or in groups is really, really crucial, and quite often overlooked as important. So things like, I'll pair a higher functioning, higher skilled peer with someone who's struggling so that person, they can help each other, is often a kind of reasoning behind grouping decisions that teachers may make. Without a structure for how a child with more skills could support a child in need of support, those partnerships often just really break down and end up frustrating both students, make especially the student with the weakness feel really bad, and heaven forbid one of the students also has a weakness in social cognition, because then it's especially confronting, stressful, frustrating, and upsetting, which can be not easily, but can be addressed through these structures. So things like sentence starters for how students participate, structures for turn taking, an A partner and a B partner, who goes first, who goes next, I'm going to time it, now you switch. If you're talking about what help looks like, you can have a whole kind of working agreement for the class about what help looks like in a partnership. Does it look like taking your pen and your paper and writing it for your peer? Probably not. Does it look like telling that person they'll never get it and you don't want to be their partner? Also, probably not. But it will most likely look like articulating your thinking and the steps you went through to solve, and then asking your partner if they could try a step. And kids are often quite good at coming up with those agreement steps or those structures if you just ask them in a focused, targeted way. But that partner work of having peers help each other can be some of the greatest experiences for students in the classroom, or some of the worst experiences for them if it's left unstructured. So just in the same way that in the reflections I saw in your quick writes, people were talking about how recess and lunch and those unstructured social times are particularly painful for students that have difficulty picking up on social cueing or initiating conversations or code switching. Similar things happen when they're grouped in the classroom, and so partly as a protective measure for students who are really struggling socially, and partly as a measure to really get the most out of group work, I cannot emphasize enough how much I encourage everyone to make sure that there are, even at the most basic level, a structure of A partner, B partner, in partnerships or in groups. And that's my kind of stance on the matter. Does anyone have questions or comments about that? Eva, I agree. Okay. Well, with that in mind, if there's no other questions or comments, I'll probably let you guys go. I thank you for coming tonight. We have a small group, but I think it's spring break for a lot of people. So hopefully for our last session, we'll have a lot of representation here. And I really, really, really appreciate all of you being here. And I totally appreciate the quality of your thinking and your work. And I hope you have a great week, and I will look forward to seeing you next Wednesday. Okay? Bye-bye. Thank you. Thank you. Bye-bye.